Good morning, Detachment 842. My name is Cadet Paul, and today we have a very special guest with us. This is retired Lieutenant General Hogg, and she's here for Major Medina's retirement ceremony, and we are very excited to have you on the podcast.
Very excited to be here.
Thank you. So I would like to know a little bit about your journey towards military service. What was it that inspired you to join the Air Force, and what was your commissioning source?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I grew up in the military. My dad was active duty enlisted. At the time, he was security forces. So he's a policeman, basically. Mm-hmm. So I grew up moving and being very familiar with how the Air Force responded and acted and all of their, ins and outs and all that kind of stuff. My dad was a very particular man about his appearance. And especially being security forces, he didn't go out that door till he was like all in order, and I was always awed at how he looked. And so, never thought at the time growing up, I never grew up thinking I was going to come in the military, because back then, I was like, well, I want to grow up, and I want to get married, and I want to have kids, right? And so as I got into high school, I decided that I was going to become a nurse. Always loved nursing, as a kid, played doctor, nurse, all that kind of stuff with my teddy bears and my animals and all that stuff. So I never thought about even coming in. Went to college, had some recruiters come, talk about the military, but again, my mindset was, I want to get married, I want to have kids, right? And I didn't think that a military career would be very conducive to that. Graduated, met my husband, who was active duty, enlisted at the time. And we, again, not thinking about coming in the military, we got married. And he got his first change of assignment, his first PCS. And I thought to myself, well, I'm not going to start from ground zero every time you get a new assignment. Mm-hmm. So why not look into coming into the military? So went to a recruiter, talked to a recruiter, and they knew that Jeff was active duty because he came with me. And the first assignment they gave me, initial assignment, because I was coming in direct commission, mm-hmm. so I didn't have to go to OTS or any of that kind of stuff. As a matter of fact, that's probably a good thing. Probably wouldn't have survived, but anyhow, so direct commission, and he couldn't go to that assignment, and so I was like, why would I do that? So I declined the first time, and then the second time, I said, look, I don't want to start from square one every time we do this. And so we went to a new recruiter and we talked about it, and I told him, look, if you give me an assignment where my husband can't go, I'm probably not going to accept it. So the second time around, they gave us an assignment that we both could be together at.
It's a little more accommodating.
Yeah, and so I signed the paperwork, and here I am, 37 years later.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah. My mother also got a direct commission. So how do you think, if you're willing to divulge a little bit, how do you think that growing up with your father, who was also in security forces, kind of influenced you as a person in the way that you grew up and maybe the way that your personality developed?
Oh, absolutely. So, growing up and with my dad being in the military and, rules and regulations and appearance and all those kinds of things, he was very much an attention to detail person and a problem solver. And I think that's what I have taken from my father. Is, I am also very much an attention to detail person, making sure that everything is in its place and, that it's right and what it needs to be. But I'm also, looking at things, okay, can we do this better? Can we do this differently? And my dad was that way too. He was a handyman, so he was always thinking of ways to improve or change or remodel. And I took that from him. I'm not, if a reg says one thing, I understand it, I listen to it, I follow it. But if my mind goes, I think there's a better way, or maybe that reg is outdated, because let's face it, some of our regs are like really old. And then I go, okay, what do I need to do to make that different? And so then I'll go through the process to change that if I have the opportunity to do that. So attention to detail and problem solving, I think, is what my dad gave me.
So do you think that your attention to detail and your detail-oriented aspects to your personality have positively or negatively impacted you in a position of leadership?
Both, positive and negative, right? I sometimes the attention to detail can come off a little gruff, right? And people can take that the wrong way. But then at the same time, my attention to detail, I truly believe, is what really got me to become the Air Force Surgeon General. Not that I was aspiring to that. I was just doing the best that I could wherever the Air Force planted me. Because you have to do that, right? Sometimes the Air Force doesn't send you where you want to go, right? And so what do you do with that? You have two choices. You can be unhappy the whole time and miss out on a lot of opportunities, or you can decide to make the best of it and do as best as you can wherever you're at. And so that was my attitude, right? Because I kept asking for assignments on the East Coast because I'm from the East Coast, and the Air Force gave me assignments on the West Coast. I kind of figured out they might have had their map turned around the wrong way, but it was really a good thing because I went to places that I probably would have never have went to. I was given jobs that I probably would have never have gotten, and I learned these new places. I went out and explored, McConnell Air Force Base in Kansas. When someone told me I was going to McConnell, the first thing I said was, "Where's that?" And they said, "Kansas." I said, "I don't want to go to Kansas." Well, it was a great assignment, right? So, yeah.
So when I was looking at your biography, it really did seem like you kind of went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And like you said, you're from Maine, your family's from the East Coast. So having so many assignments where you were transferring back and forth, in an area that's close to your relatives to an area that's not, if you'd be willing to tell us, how did that kind of impact your relationship with your family and your family life?
Right. So, again, I grew up that way. So my dad and us were stationed not close to our families, our biological families, but we also had our Air Force family too, right? So we made a point on summers and vacations to go home and visit family so that we would keep that relationship up. And we just, you do it distance, like we've done in COVID. You keep your relationships going in a distant way. Back then, of course, we didn't have FaceTime or any of that. We had to do phone calls, and they charged an arm and a leg for it. But that's how we did it, was just staying connected by coming home for vacations and letters. We wrote letters, we did phone calls, those kinds of things. So, I know some people are born and graduate and stay in the same hometown forever, right? I think that being in the Air Force allowed myself and my children, my two daughters, to experience things they would have never experienced. I think it's made them more well-rounded individuals, more tolerant of different cultures, different lifestyles, different thinking, which has significantly benefited them in their lifetimes now.
So in nearly 38 years of service, I'm sure you've seen a lot of change, not just in the culture of the military, but even just the way that the military runs on an organizational level. Can you tell us a little bit about the changes that you've seen, positive and negative?
Right. Lots of change. And there will be lots of change to come, which in my early years, I was not a good change maker. I was very much, I followed everything to a T, right? So, if the reg said don't, I didn't. If the reg said do, I did. And so when the changes came, especially being in the medical career field, a lot of quality care and all those kinds of things as we have moved along started changing, and how we're supposed to take care of patients and do different things. And I'd be like, no, I got this. I take care of my patients very well. Just let me do this, right? And so I sometimes labeled myself as an RC, a resistant to change person. But then as I matured and got, a little bit older, I decided, you know what, change is constant. Change is always going to be there, and you need to figure out how to handle it. Mm-hmm. And you can handle it in one of two ways. You can stick your head in the sand, like the ostrich, and think that, when it gets done, I'll pull my head out and I'll be okay, right? Or you can be the person, actually three ways. You can be the person that goes, puts up the Heisman and go, okay, go ahead and do this. I don't think it's a good idea. And when it doesn't work out, I'll say, I told you so, but go right ahead, right? Or you can be the person who shapes that change, right? So I decided I want to be the person to shape the change. Mm-hmm. I didn't always agree with the changes that were being made in the military. I don't agree with some of the changes now. Mm-hmm. For example, and I'll throw myself out on the limb here, when Congress decided to reform the military medical health system, mm-hmm. and give most of it to a civilian agency, I was not in favor of that. I still am not totally in favor of it. I think there are some things that could be done very well, but I still think we are a military medical system. Mm-hmm. We are not a civilian medical system. So I could have just stepped back and said, okay, do whatever you want to do, let it go. But I decided, well, it's a decision that's been made. Mm-hmm. I tried to change it. I was not successful. So now my only option is to try to shape that change. Mm-hmm. So that's what I did. I jumped in and I tried to shape it in a way that would be beneficial not only for the new civilian agency, the Defense Health Agency, but also for the military services. Mm-hmm. Because again, we're a military medical service. We take care of military members. We go to war. Mm-hmm. We go help civilian communities when they're in need. It's not like being a civilian healthcare system, and you can't, in my opinion, handle it that way. But
so is there another example of such change that was made in your time of service that you also took ownership of, and really chose to shape?
Well, pretty much any change that came through was something that I always had an opportunity to provide my input in. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the recent changes, the ponytails, mm-hmm. right, the hair. They came to me as the Air Force Surgeon General and said, hey, will you go get behind this? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, let's think about this. Why are we doing this, mm-hmm. right? And it's really not a medical issue. They wanted to try to make it a medical issue, but it's really not a medical issue. It's really about what's so important about the ponytails, mm-hmm. instead of, having it tied up against your head, mm-hmm. right? What matters about that? How does that impact us as a profession of arms? Not a whole lot, mm-hmm. right? As long as it's professional, it's clean, neat, all that kind of stuff. Okay. The other thing is then we also always have to think about what the second and third order effects are to mm-hmm. any of those kinds of changes, right?
Right.
So if we're allowing certain individuals to have certain freedoms, mm-hmm. what about the other individuals in the service, right?
Right?
And so I think we have to continually think about not only the change itself, but what are the second and third order effects, and make sure that we're not creating classes of people that are different, mm-hmm. right?
Right. So we'll move a little bit more into your career a little bit. While I was looking at your biography, and it actually wasn't until I told my parents that we would be having you on the podcast where I kind of understood just how monumental your career has been, not just as a woman, right, but also as a nurse practitioner. Generally speaking, the Surgeon General is a doctor, right? So how does it feel to be someone who's broke so many glass ceilings over the course of your career?
Oh my goodness, it's quite humbling and honoring at the same time. Again, as I said earlier, I was never aspiring to be the Surgeon General. Mm-hmm. I was very happy being a nurse practitioner. I loved my job. I loved taking care of patients. I still love taking care of patients. But as I continued progressing in my career and up in the ranks, other people were recognizing that they thought that I had some good leadership qualities. Mm. I'll never forget my really first true leadership experience, and that was back in the days we had what we called a squadron section commander. Usually was in the medical career field an MSc officer, so a medical service officer, not anybody clinical because they were all admin. Well, we had a gap, and my chief nurse came up to me and said, "Hey, you wanna fill in for 4 months?" I was like, "Well, I don't know how to do that, but sure." That was usually my answer. I don't know how to do that, but okay, And so I went in and filled in as a squadron section commander for 4 months, and my whole world changed. Because I saw a different side of the Air Force that I hadn't seen before. Because being medical, you're usually stuck seeing patients, especially if you're a provider. I shouldn't say stuck.
That's where you are. That's your job.
That's my job, right? And so having that new vision of other facets of the Air Force, I was like, wow, good and bad. I had to give, Article 15s and letter of reprimands and stuff to people, and I just felt horrible about that, especially in the beginning, until my wise chief came in to me one day and said, "Look, you're not doing this. They did it. You're just having to do the consequences of that," right? Which, was difficult sometimes because, kids will be kids, and, you think, well, on the outside that would never happen, but we're not on the outside. We're not working for Walmart. We're working for the United States Air Force and for the United States of America, and we're a profession of arms, and so with that comes higher responsibilities, right? But anyhow, so I was like, well, that's kind of cool. So I started moving up that ladder of leadership while still doing some of my clinical work at the same time. So I think, again, I was just very blessed to have good people who supported me, who mentored me. When I was having, challenges in some of my leadership roles, I had people I could go sit down and go, "Hey, what do you do?" Right? "This is what I'm thinking, but I'm not sure if this is right." And it's hard. It's hard being, I think it's hard being a leader because of some of the negative things you have to do, right? And so sometimes you want to second guess yourself. Did I do that right? Did I not do that right? Should I have done this? Should I have done that? But you just, what I've done in over the years is, I've learned lessons. I maybe handled a situation that maybe wasn't quite right, and so that I would go back and I'd say, okay, what could I have done differently? And then I go, okay, pick that rock up, put it in my rucksack, because when this comes up the next time, I'm going to do that differently. Right?
So what advice would you give for maybe aspiring nurses in the medical corps, who might not feel like the same opportunities are provided to them moving forward?
Right. So I tell people all the time, the very first thing that you need to do is you need to learn your job, and you need to learn it well, right? Because that's the very first thing you need to do. You need to know how to be a great nurse. You need to know how to be a great doc. You need to know how to be a great pilot, a great intel officer, right? Learn your job well, okay? Second thing is learn your organization well. And when I say organization, I really mean our big organization, Air Force. Because I will tell you, that's probably one of the things I regret in my career. Because when I came in as a medical officer, I was like, hey, I'm medical. What do I care what that plane is over there and what kind of bombs are on it and how far it flies, right? You guys take care of that. I can't command any line units, so I'm just gonna focus on medical, right? Yes, I did my professional military education, but it was like, do it so you can get it done, check the block and get out, right? Don't do that, all right? Learn your job well, learn your Air Force organization well, learn the whole thing about it. What it's like to be on the line side, what's important to them, right? Because that's really what it's about. And then know what your organization values if you want to advance up the leadership track, right? And then you need to get yourself competitive for those situations, right? You don't get to select whether or not you get the jobs,
right?
But you need to make yourself competitive enough. So again, that's all about doing a good job where you're planted. Do the best job that you can. Make that place better when you leave than when you found it, right? That's what it's all about in my eyes.
So like you said, you never really aspired to go all the way to becoming the Surgeon General, but at some point in your career you must have decided, hey, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to be, you know, the most competitive that I can be. Bloom where you're planted, right?
Right.
At what point in your career did you kind of decide that that was what you wanted to do, that that was where you wanted to go, that you wanted to make that advancement?
I think that came when I was major. So I was kind of older in my career when I decided all this stuff, because again, I was very content being a nurse practitioner. I mean, that was my life, you know, that was my childhood dream, was to be a nurse. Not even a nurse practitioner, just to be a nurse. Then I came in the military and I found out, hey, there's nurse practitioners. These are people who take care of their patients and have their own say on how to make them healthy, right? Instead of just always following doctors' orders. And so I think maybe that's really when it started. Because I remember my chief nurse, when I told her I was going to be a nurse practitioner, she said, "What do you want to do that for?" Right? And I'm like, well, because she at the time when I became a nurse practitioner in the 70s, 80s, we were looked at as abandoning the nursing career field, right? So I think, you know, maybe that was my beginning, but I didn't recognize it then. But as a major, that's kind of when I recognized that maybe there is something besides just seeing patients. And I loved taking care of people. I loved being challenged with difficult situations. I loved making change, you know, for the better, I hope, all the time. Maybe not all the time, but, you know, that was my goal, right? Some worked out, some did not. But the ones that didn't, again, I learned from those so that the next time it would be better. And so that's kind of when I started going, okay, if I want to, and then of course being in our organization of the Air Force, to make rank, there's certain things that you've got to do, right? Not only just do a good job, but you've got to do your professional military education. You have to have a diverse portfolio, thank you. And so that's kind of when I started really kind of going, okay, well, not just stay behind my desk seeing patients, what other things could I do? And so I started branching out a little bit more. My mentors started branching me out a little bit more, you know, because as a person, and many of us, you know, when, you know, I'm a nurse, I'm not a commander, I'm not a, you know, but my mentors would come up and say, I think you could do that job. You need to do that job. You need to be really good at it, right? And so then I did it. I started getting recognized. I continued to be promoted in the Air Force because, again, not up to me. Your record goes before the board.
Right.
And so, you know, if they say yes, great. If they say no, then... And that's really what happened. You know, I just kept getting the yeses.
So over the course of your career, right, when you were looking at maybe the officers who were above you and looking for your mentors, what were the attributes that you looked in for them in order to, you know, better develop yourself? Right.
Well, the attributes of my mentors really had to be that they had to be brutally honest. Good, bad, or otherwise, they had to be honest with me. I am not perfect by any shape, way, or mean, right? And I've not done everything exactly right. And I want a mentor who's going to tell me, you really didn't do that well, right? So, you know, when we get our feedbacks, that's probably one of the biggest pet peeves I have, is people are not honest in feedbacks. They just tell everybody that they walk on water. And they don't tell them if there's something that's not going right. And then if something really goes bad down the road, you're sitting there going, well, no one ever told me, right? Why didn't they tell me? So that's what I looked for in a mentor. They had to give me the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? Somebody who would be willing to help guide me and not stifle me. So if I brought up a new idea or a new thought process or a new way of doing business, I didn't want them to say, no, you can't do that because that's not what the reg says, or that's not how we do business, right? I wanted them to go, okay, let's think about this. Let's talk about this. what are you going to do?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I came with the second and third order effects, right?
Right.
Because my mentors always said, okay, if you do this, what are the second and third order effects?
Mm-hmm.
And that's really how I built my thinking around that because of my mentors. But so yeah, that's what I look for in a mentor. And then a connection. You got to have a connection.
Right.
Not all of them were nurses. I had some line mentors, especially as I climbed up the ladder. Because again, I did not pay attention to my line professional military education. I did it. I read the books, I did the tests and all that kind of stuff, but it was just get this done.
Mm-hmm.
And now, I was like, oh, you should have paid attention to that. So I had to go back and do some remedial training. But I would go to my line officers and say, okay, what about this? What if I do that? What would you? And so I think that's a good mentor is going to give you the truth, good no matter what.
So you mentioned that in the feedback process, a lot of people shy away from having that level of honesty about the performance of the people that they're grading. Besides just having honesty, and I've got two different, thoughts about this, but besides just enhancing your ability to be honest and have clear and open communication about what was done right, what was done wrong, what are other parts or other aspects of giving feedback that we as officers should cultivate?
Right. Other parts of feedback that we should cultivate, I think one is caring,
Mm-hmm.
right? You have to care about the person you're talking to, that you want them to be the best that they can be, right? And that's why it's important to give them honest feedback. You have to be willing to tell an individual if they desire to have a certain job or something like that, and you've not seen them do a good job that you think that they could get there,
Mm-hmm.
You have to be honest with them. You have to tell them, nah, you're not ready.
Mm-hmm.
But then, as a person giving feedback, you then have to give them very specific things that they could do to make themselves ready.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're not ready right now for it, but what could they do to get ready?
Mm-hmm.
So as the supervisor, you then have to challenge them a little bit more to see if you think they could get there and give them those different kinds of opportunities to help them grow a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
So not only do you say, you did terrible at that, and so, I'm marking you down on that. You need to say, yeah, you didn't handle that so well, but maybe next time, let's think about maybe these things. This is what I want you to go work on,
Mm-hmm.
right? I want you to take this job because I want you to, challenge yourself. And then you have to be there to kind of guide them through that.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they'll do well, and sometimes you'll find out that that's probably just not the right place for them. So,
Mm-hmm.
so not only just giving them feedback, but you have to give them areas and things that they need to do so they could grow.
Mm-hmm. So the other thought thread I have about this is that a lot of people have discomfort with being honest, just because sometimes it is an uncomfortable conversation to have. So how do we as officers kind of overcome that discomfort and say, hey, this is what really happened,
Yeah.
despite how it might make someone else feel personally?
Right. So I have this motto that I use, and it's called speak to be understood, listen to understand, right? So you need to make sure that you're very clear when you're giving them your feedback of what your perception was, right? Then you have to listen to understand what their perception was and how do you meet in the middle. If there is a meeting, sometimes they're not. Sometimes it's just blanket, here was a line, you crossed it, and here's the consequences, right? But oftentimes, if you're listening, you'll pick up things that you understand were a little bit different because of how they were seeing the situations.
Right.
And then you can help guide them for the next time, right? So I think that's really important. The other thing that I think is really important is when you're giving feedback, this is what I did my entire career, is not only do you give feedback, then you need to let the person you're giving feedback to rate you, right? I always did that, and you got to give the expectations up front. So very first time you meet the person that you're going to be leading or supervising or whatever, you bring them in and you give them your expectations, right? Here's how I do things. Here's what I expect you to do, right? And I would always tell them. And when we have feedback, our first official feedback, I said, not only am I going to give you feedback, you're going to give me feedback. How well am I doing supervising you, leading you, right? And I said, you got to be honest. I don't want to hear, oh, you're great, you're awesome, you're wonderful. I always want to hear, what could I do better? What's the one thing that I could do better for you, right? Which helped me, also as a leader grow. So I think that's really what you need to do is you gotta speak to understand, so they understand what your expectations are of them, so they can then go out and either meet them or exceed them. And then you need to listen, because we all come from different experiences. And I'll give you an example. Touring as a 3-star, I had a young airman one time say to me when we were talking about diversity and all of those kinds of things. I said, what kind of challenges have you had? And she said, well, when I was in basic training, I was always getting yelled at because I didn't make eye contact with the drill master, right? And she said, but in my culture, you don't do that to superiors. You don't look them in the eye. And so we've got to get better at understanding
Other
each of
people's
us.
culture.
That's right, because we've got a lot of cultures, not just our Air Force culture.
In the United States.
Yeah, that's right. And so you've got to understand. So just because someone doesn't, give you eye contact, maybe it's a part of who they are, how they grew up. And I think we're starting to do a better job of understanding those differences and how people respond and act. Because, it doesn't, we might look at it as, oh, they're just screwing up and they're not doing what they're supposed to do. Well, no, they're doing what they were brought up to do, right? And so we've got to get better at understanding that.
So you also brought up a really interesting point about other people giving you feedback and being on the receiving end of that feedback. Sometimes enlisted personnel might feel a little intimidated, giving that honest feedback to an officer, especially an officer who might be in their direct supervisor role. So what as an officer can you do to enforce a culture among maybe your flight, maybe your squadron, to help your enlisted personnel feel comfortable being honest?
Trust that when they give you bad feedback, whether you like it or not, that you're not going to rake them through the coals, right? I think that's the most important thing. And that's what I would tell people all the time. Another thing, when I was supervising people, I would say, you don't have to agree with everything that I do. What I want you to do is, be professional about providing me feedback. Like you don't stand up in a meeting and go, Colonel Hogg, you're doing this wrong, you shouldn't be doing that, you shouldn't be doing this, right? What you do is you come in and see me, we shut the door, we talk about it, we agree to disagree, we agree to agree, whatever. But then when we open the door, we're on the same page. And I might not like it, or you might not like it, but we're on the same page, right? And then you go out and you follow through with the direction because I'm in charge, right? But I always like to solve problems in groups because I have one brain, I come from one set of experiences, I have one way of solving problems. You have a different way. All these others have different ways, right? When you bring all those together in a room, things will come up that I didn't even think about. It happened all the time. I'd be like, okay, we're gonna do this. And someone would go, well, what about that? And I'm like, oh, I didn't even think about that. And then we go, okay, what about that? How can we make it work with this? Or, do we have to go a little bit different way? So when I had the opportunity, which was most of the time, I did problem solving with groups because, again, different viewpoints, different thought processes, and you get a better solution,
Right.
in my opinion. I can make decisions by myself when I have to, and I do, and I did. But most of the time, I try to do it in group think, because I think that it works out better. So you just have to, they have to trust you that if they're going to give you bad feedback, that you're not going to yell, scream, get angry, punish them. Yeah, you can't do that, or they will never tell you the truth.
So I'm going to switch to a bit of a different direction now, and that is a lot of us in ROTC are students. We're also cadets. Some of us are single parents. Some of us are just parents, married and have spouses and other major commitments in our life. And we often struggle with time management. And it's a very frequent thing for us to hear that doesn't change when you go on active duty.
Yeah.
So has there been a time in your career when you were really struggling to balance all of the different spheres and aspects of your life, and how did you overcome that challenge?
Right, absolutely. So I was a dual military family, right? My husband and I were active duty. He was enlisted, I was an officer. That was a challenge because a lot of people go, "Oh, you fraternized." No, I was married to him before I came in.
Context matters.
Yeah. So we were married for 5 years before I came in, and I'll never forget the recruiter going, "Well, you're going to make more money than he is. What are you going to do with that?" And I said, "Well," said, "are you going to have 2 bank accounts, right?" And I said, "No." I said, "I'm going to only have one." I said, "Because what's mine is mine and what's his is mine, so it doesn't matter," right? But yes, that was a challenge. And being in the medical profession, I couldn't just, if something happened, I couldn't just up and leave and go get the kids, right? Unless it was a true, absolute emergency. My husband, on the other hand, had that opportunity. He could, if there was really something that needed to happen, he could, go do that. So what we did was, in our early years, we just kind of go, okay, who's doing what, who's going where, what do the kids got, what do we got? We were active family. We did intramural sports. My kids did intramural sports, and then school, and so it was challenging at times. The one thing that I will tell, and I tell people all the time, is you need to understand that the Air Force is not your entire life, right? It's important, and what you do for the Air Force is important, but it's not your entire life. One day this uniform comes off, and if you don't cultivate
a life outside
of the Air Force, you're going to be looking around going, where am I? Where's my family? Because maybe they're not going to be there. So you have to give time to your family. And quality versus quantity sometimes is what it's all about, right? You could have a stay-at-home parent and they're not very good and they're with their kids all the time. Or you have a parent who's not with them all the time, but the time that they are with them is quality time. So that's what you need to do. The other thing you do, especially as you are aspiring up ranks, up jobs, up leadership responsibilities, you need to know when to disconnect. In our world today, when I was growing up, there was no BlackBerry, there was no iPhone, there was no email. It was like you pick up the phone and you call somebody, right? But now it's constant. You cannot get away from it. I know people who keep their phones by their bedside, and every time an email comes in, it rings, or and I'm like, no. So you need to know when to disconnect. And so as I went up the leadership track and became a general officer, and my husband was still with me. My husband passed away almost 4 years ago, so he's not with me anymore. But he was sometimes my timekeeper too. He was like, you need to turn that off, honey. I was like, okay. And so I told him, I said, if you let me work really hard, Monday through Friday, sometimes late nights, then I will give you the weekend, right? And I did. And I told all of my staff, okay, here's the deal. I do not expect you to be on the phone, on the email 24/7. If I need you, I'm going to call you. I'm not going to text you. I'm not going to email you. I'm going to call you, right? If I really need you. I tended to work late at night to answering emails because I was busy all day, right? I said, so if I send you an email at 10 o'clock at night,
Don't
I am not
respond.
expecting you to respond. If I need you to respond, I'll call you, right? And I told my leaders, if you need me, you need to call me. Do not text me. Do not email me. Because I am not sitting by my BlackBerry or my iPhone 24/7, right? I have other things that are also just as important.
Right.
And so that's what I did. And so you really have to find out what that balance is. Now, there were times I had to work over the weekend, you know, and Jeff understood that. You know, I would say, honey, it's crazy. I'm going to have to go, you know, I have to go in, or something was going on where I had to go in. So you got to have an understanding partner who understands that, you know, there are demands. So you just have to find what that right balance is for you. Even though I worked long hours during the week, we had date night. Every Thursday night, we'd have date night. Sometimes it happened at 5, sometimes it happened at 7, but we always had a date night, and we'd go out and have dinner and just relax and you know talk. So that, I think, you know, that's really what you got to do, and you got to work together as a team, right? Because especially if you have children, even if you don't have children, the car has to get fixed, the dogs have to go to the vet, right? And so you got to work together. Who can do this? Who can do this week, right?
So. A lot of us who go through the ROTC program come from the experience of having had part-time jobs in retail or service, and like you said, in this day and age, constant communication is a very prevalent part of that aspect of the workforce. So when a lot of us commission, maybe we have a tendency to still be in that mindset. We need to constantly be available. So how do you go about asserting your boundaries? You know, this is my time, or I can't do this right now, especially when other people are pushing them.
Yeah. The very first thing you need to do is to give your expectations with new supervisors, with new individuals that work for you. I mean, expectations. Here's what it is. Now, if they're reaching out to you and it's an emergency or it's something that you have to do, then you just have to do it, right? You have to go, I'm sorry, we can't go to the movies right now because I have to go into work because, you know, Russia's invading Ukraine, right? You know, so you've got to know that that is a priority, but it's got to be a true emergency. You also need to trust your team. You are one person. You don't know it all, and you can't do it all. So when you build your team around you, you're building people that you trust, that have knowledge. What I usually say, that strengthens your weaknesses, because I don't know it all. Did I know it all as a Surgeon General? Heck no, you know. But I put people around me who knew the things that I didn't know, who could do the things that I didn't necessarily have to do. I could give direction and they could go do it. And so that's what you need to do. You have to build a team that strengthens your weaknesses, that you can rely on to go get things done if it doesn't absolutely have to just be you.
So we're going to flip the script to a different area, and that is the Space Force. So you were the Surgeon General for approximately 3 years, right?
Right.
And in the 3 years that the Space Force has been around, what are the developments that you've kind of seen, you know, maybe at the organizational level for the way that the Space Force is developing? Yeah,
so that was quite interesting, you know, because when Congress decided to make the Space Force a different branch, they put it under the Air Force. So the Secretary of the Air Force is still in charge of the Space Force, right? Directs the Space Force. And they also said that you're not going to get everything you're not going to be a totally individual Space Force, right? You're going to borrow some things from the Air Force. So the Air Force is going to provide some support to you as the Space Force. And so that's how we're dealing with that right now. It's maturing. It takes some time to really mature and get where you need to be as a new, fully functioning force, right? And how do you build those ties with the things that you don't have that you have to rely on the Air Force to do? Medical was one of those. That was a big issue that I fought in the very beginning. Still fight, because I do believe that the Space Force really needs its own medical force.
I was going to ask you that next. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Because space is not aerospace, right?
It's space.
It's space, right? Aerospace medicine is
Different.
not leaving gravity, right? Pretty much. And the medicine that you have for those kinds of things is not going to be the same medicine when we go and leave gravity in a space vehicle and
Right.
fight from space. So I used to give them this analogy. I said, think of this. We're up in, the Enterprise, and somebody has an appendicitis, and we have to do surgery. And we put them on the table, and we're in, zero gravity, and we do our incision, and all of a sudden, everything's flying everywhere, right? Yeah. I said, how you can handle that? And they're like, oh, I don't know. Like, yeah, exactly. I said, I need, as your Air Force Surgeon General, I said, I need to now start building capability for space medicine. You can't build that capability if you don't have authorizations, right? Or you can't do it very well. We're doing it, but we're doing it under the auspices of, aerospace, right? So without that, it's hard to build that total capability. So I think as the Space Force matures and really starts understanding everything that they really need to do, they'll change too. Will we get some space medics? I don't know. I hope so. I hope so. I don't think it needs to be huge.
A couple AFSCs maybe that specialize in that specific area of medicine.
Yeah, absolutely. But they have to have a little cadre of people. So accessions and retentions, right? Accession standards and retention standards. Are they the same for what we currently have for the Air Force? So is Air Force accession and retention standards the same for Space Force? I don't know. Maybe not, right? Because they're doing something different. They don't deploy. They're usually in a room. Well, some might deploy, like space astronauts and stuff, right? But most of the people are going to stay in an area with computers and screens and all that kind of stuff. So, is our retention and accession standards, do those need to be a little bit different for those people? I don't know. So those are the things that I think we'll work through as it grows and matures, and we really understand, oh, we didn't think about that, or oops, what about this,
So obviously the Space Force is kind of in its infancy in terms of its conception and its organizational structure, how it's going to work, its culture. But is there anything from your perspective that cadets who would like to become guardians should do to prepare themselves to be better selected for that role when they commission?
Yes, two things. First, understand what the Space Force is looking for. What are the skills and the competencies that they are looking for in the Space Force? And if you want to be a guardian, then you need to get those skills and competencies. And then the other thing is apply. Sometimes people don't apply because they think, well, I don't have this, or I don't have that, or I haven't done this. The answer is always no if you don't
work towards it,
or just put your application in, right? So if you put your application in and the answer comes back as no, then you try to find out, well, why was it no? What was I missing? And if you really want it, then you have to
go get that qualification.
And put that on your resume, right?
So do you think that there will be opportunities for officers that commission into the Air Force to cross-commission into the Space Force later in their career?
Absolutely. They're the skills and competencies that they're looking for. We have a lot of officers in the Air Force that have those skills and competencies. So yeah, I if you want to be a guardian, go for it. Yeah.
So now we're going to move towards advice for cadets. And something I'm really interested to hear was if you had any initial culture shocks when you first commissioned and became a second lieutenant.
Yes. as I said, my dad was enlisted, right? And so I am a very outgoing, kind of person who just likes to jump into things. And when you become an officer, people are treating you differently. They jump up when you come in the room, they salute you outside, they open doors for you, right? And I was like, I can do that, For example, this morning, I had a rental, flat tire, and I stayed with another fellow general officer on Lackland, and I was like, well, I'll go out and change a tire, right? And she goes, you can't change a tire. I said, yes, I can, So yeah, I think the culture shock was how people treated me when I became an officer, right? And it was uncomfortable, because I was like, no, I'm just like you. I'm just like you. I just have different ranks on, right? And so, but that's how I've handled myself my entire career. I tell people, if I'm not going to give honest feedback, then I can't expect you to give honest feedback, right? I put my pants on just like you do. I understand that, there's customs and courtesies with rank, and I accept those, but I also like to be approachable. And if you make yourself, seem like you're not approachable, then I don't think you can be as successful. So I think don't let this define who you are, right? Because, again, one day it goes away, and two, if you let this define who you are, then I don't know that people are going to be as comfortable talking to you.
Right. So over the course of your career, what was the most challenging part of leadership? Like, what was the most challenging part of supervising and directly leading people?
People. Yeah, I think that was, the job was not challenging. It was people and understanding people and the differences, and I think that was the most challenging. If somebody was acting out, why? Why were they doing that? Was it something you were doing? Is it something that's going on in their life? Because sometimes we don't think that if someone's having a bad day or not doing what they need to do, we automatically think that they're a bad person.
That's just who they are.
Yeah, they're a bad person, right? Well, if you take the time to go talk to them and find out, you might find out, their dog just died, they don't, the car broke down and they don't have any money. Wouldn't you be crabby, if that was happening stressed, right? So I think don't assume that people do bad things because they're bad people, right? At the same time, sometimes people do bad things because they're just bad people. And you need to be willing and able to take care of that, right? So I think the people issues, the dynamics, not everybody gets along. And so you would have to, go in and be the mediator, okay, what's going on here, and then try to figure out, right? And I think that's probably the most challenging in any leadership role is the people dynamics. And because we don't choose sometimes who works for us. Oftentimes, they just come to us.
And you have to work with what you've been given.
And you have to work with it. And so, what you do is you try to, grow and help those individuals who are struggling to be a part of the team. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
So over the course of your career, how did your work-life balance change? Maybe from the time when you were a second lieutenant versus the time you were a major versus the time when you finally made general officer.
Right. So early on, I went to work at 7:30 and I went home at 4:30. And that was it. Everything else was me or my family, right? Because I was married and had kids when I came in, right? Had one child. Second one was born in the military. But as I started going up the leadership track, then, I'd get phone calls after work. So-and-so, just got picked up for DUI. It's like, oh, okay, I'll take care of it in the morning, you know, or this or that, right? But as you climb the leadership track, your time becomes less, right? The job takes more time. As a commander, as a squadron commander, you know, I had 250 people under me, right? Yes, I had enlisted leaders who did most of it, but I still had to take care of that, right? And then, you know, group commander, and then MAGCOM commanders, right? And then, you know, pretty much you have no time, right? But you just have to be able to, again, balance that. Know what you have to take care of now and what can wait. Everything is not a fire. If you treat everything as a fire, it'll go out of control. So you have to make sure that you know what to prioritize and what other things can be. You know what, we'll take care of that when we get into work in the morning. And again, setting the expectations. Don't call me unless, right? So, yeah.
I forgot to ask you this earlier while we were talking about, you know, your career-specific experiences, but I was looking at your bio, and you were promoted from colonel to major general, and
That's right.
totally skipped over brigadier general. Could
Right.
you divulge and tell us a little bit about how that happened, why that happened?
Yeah. So that was a law in Congress years ago, and I can't remember the year now, but years ago when Senator Inouye, who was the senator for Hawaii, was in office, he served in the war and was severely injured. And he always he told this story, he's passed away now, but he always told this story that when he woke up and came to, there was an angel standing over him, and it was a nurse. Well, during that time, nurses were never made rank over colonel, and very few made colonel. And so he put a legislative law in that said nurses would be able to promote to a 2-star and skip over the brigadier general because he didn't feel that the medical community was paying attention to other leaders besides just physicians.
Right.
Because at the time, if you weren't a physician, you didn't lead. You wouldn't be a squadron commander, you wouldn't be a flight commander, you wouldn't be a group commander. Only physicians did that, right? And so the law passed. And so that's how it became a 2-star from
so cool.
06. Well, cool, but oh my gosh, people, when I put 2-star on, you know, people looked at me as a 2-star saying, oh, she's already been 2 years or a year as a 1-star. And I'm thinking, no. I haven't. You know, there's a senior leadership course that you go to when you first make general officer, right? I went in as a 2-star. Everybody else was a 1-star. And everybody's like looking at me going, what's going on? So I would just tell them, well, I'm in remedial training because I didn't get it the first time. But no, and then I would say, no, I didn't make 1-star. I said I went straight to a 2-star. And they're like, you did? And I say, so not many people know that. That law's changed now. It changed in 2017, even though we fought it. It changed. So it'll be interesting to see where we go from here. Whether or not, you know, we'll still have a diverse opportunity for leadership in the medical career field. Yeah.
So we're running short on time, but I've got a couple final questions for you. And the first one is, what is your proudest moment as an Air Force officer?
Proudest moment? You know, I loved everything that I did. I would have to say probably being selected as the Air Force Surgeon General. And I say that because, again, this was the first time that the Surgeon General didn't look like all the past Surgeon Generals, right? And so I think I just was like, I'm like, I can't believe that they picked me because they had other people to pick, right? But I think that was probably my proudest moment because it was like, wow, you know, I don't have, as I said, you need to know what your organization sees as valuable, right? And as an officer in the Air Force, there's usually 3 things that kind of get you on the up and up track. Getting promoted, ahead of your peers, so, below the zone. Going to professional military education in residence, so going to Air Command and Staff, going to Air War College, and then, of course, having successful commands. I didn't have the first 2. I was promoted on time every time, never below the zone. I never went to professional military education in residence. My whole time was doing correspondence because our opportunities as medical officers to get into residence is very small, right? And then I guess I had successful commands. So I would have to say, having them put more value on my work and what I did, how I led, changes I made, because I think that's probably, in my opinion, what maybe tipped them over the edge. Other than, well, she didn't go to Air War College in residence, she wasn't promoted below the zone. So I think maybe that's probably one of my proudest moments. But I enjoyed my entire career. People say, what would you do differently? I said, there's only one thing I'd do differently, and that would be to learn the line side better. Which I said earlier. You got to know, because that's really where what it's all about. The medical supports the line, right? So I should have paid attention better when I did correspondence PME, but yeah. But other than that, every assignment was a good assignment. No assignment was bad. Learned things at every assignment, had opportunities. I had a chief once tell me, a retired chief who came and spoke to us, and someone asked the question, "Sir, what's your formula for success?" And I kept it with me because I was like, he's spot on. And he said his formula to success was aptitude plus attitude plus opportunity equals success. He said, you don't have to be the brightest. You have to know your job and know it as well as you can, but you don't have to be the brightest. Attitude, it's all about attitude. Nobody else owns it but you. So, if you have a crappy attitude, everything else is going to be crappy, right? And then opportunity. He said, if the Air Force says, I think you can do it, go do it. Even if you don't think you can, go do it. He said, because that's really what got me to where I was today, as being the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, right? And so that's what I tell people all the time. Aptitude, attitude plus opportunity equals success. You never know what you can do until you try.
And the final question we have for you is, what is the legacy that you hope to leave behind, or you have left behind, and how does that impact the way that you feel about your time of service?
So I have 3, my leadership ethos is 3 things. One is too small a number to achieve greatness. As I said earlier, I don't know it all, and I can't do it all. And so you need to make sure that you're creating a team who can help you solve problems and handle challenges. The other one I take from John Maxwell's books, the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And then his other one is, I think it's the 18 Laws of Teamwork. I think it's 18. It's been a long time since I read it. And the other one is, the Law of the Bench, right? It's about your team. And you have to have a diverse team in order to solve and handle challenges and problems. And some of those members on your team are going to be starters, and some of those are not. But they're still valuable, and you still have to continue to grow them and challenge them. So you can't just pick on the starters to always take care of the issues, because they'll do a good job, and they'll do a good job without a whole lot of direction, right? But your other team players, maybe they're not as good, but they have certain skills that they're really good at, maybe other skills that they're not good at. You need to know that, and you need to use them, and you need to grow them, and you need to challenge them. Otherwise, you won't have a good team.
Talent management.
Yep. And then the third thing is the law of the bad apple. It's all about attitude. I don't own it. I own my attitude. I don't own your attitude. And so if your attitude's not good, you have to figure out why it's not good. what's causing issues, and then you need to change it. If you don't, you're unhappy because you're in the military and you don't like it, well, maybe the military's not for you, and maybe you need to go do something different. But you've got to take everything with a positive thought in mind, even if you didn't want to do it, right? And then the last thing I think I learned when I became a general officer and stayed for 7 years is change is constant. It's not going to go away. Some of it you will like, and some of it you won't like. Some of it you can change, and some of it you can't change. So don't be the ostrich, okay? When it comes, shape it. Shape it the best that you can, even if you don't like it, okay? Because you can. As they're writing the regs to that change, you can shape it. So make sure you're the shaper and not the ostrich.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's all the time that we have for this podcast today. Lieutenant General Hogg, thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you next time.